Mr. Timur Sulaimanov, First Deputy Chief of Staff of the President of the Republic of Kazakhstan and Chairman of MC12. Dr. Ngozi Okonjo Iweala, Director General of the WTO, Deputy Directors General of the WTO, fellow ministers, ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen. I greet you on behalf of the government and people of the Commonwealth of Dominica, who I have the honor to represent at the MC12. Allow me to associate with the statements on behalf of the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, OECS, the Caribbean Community CARICOM, and the Africa, Caribbean, and Pacific ACP states. MC12 is unprecedented in many ways. First, it is the first time in the history of the WTO that we have gone 5 years between ministerial conferences. Second, it is perhaps the first ministerial conference that is taking place in the midst of multiple global crises. Twice, our conference has been postponed on account of the COVID-19 pandemic. The world is staring at a food security crisis. Supply chain challenges have created shortages of many vital supplies around the world. Geopolitical headwinds are gathering pace. Rising energy prices and crippling debt levels threaten to undermine many of the gains which several countries have made in recent years. Of course, for countries such as Dominica, the persistent threats of natural disasters, climatic events, and environmental emergencies challenge our very existence. I cannot recall a time when such a confluence of global shocks existed simultaneously. However, global problems also require global solutions, and retreating to parochialism is not an attractive alternative. For instance, had we been more global in our orientation at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, I firmly believe that we would have all been better off today. Instead, we saw the worst of humanity on display as nations resorted to vaccine nationalism and export restrictions on equipment and supplies necessary to combat the pandemic. The end result is millions of lives lost, millions more disrupted, and billions lost in economic output and trade. In the case of the Commonwealth of Dominica, we have been hit hard by the pandemic, with an estimated decline in GDP of 11% in 2020 alone. This is astronomical for a small developing state and further demonstrates the extent of our vulnerability to exogenous shocks. In the context of several of our extant realities, the WTO has a significant role to play. For example, through the WTO, we can agree on a political declaration on a response to the pandemic. We also have before us the intellectual property waiver for COVID-19 vaccines, and it is incumbent on us to harvest a decision on this at MC12. Let me now turn my attention to the negotiations on fisheries subsidies, first launched over 20 years ago. We are all aware that many countries, especially large fishing nations, provide massive amounts of subsidies to their fishing sectors. These subsidies are estimated to be $35 billion worldwide every year. Many of these subsidies lead to overfishing and also contribute to illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. Of the 600 fish stocks evaluated by the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization, 33% are now either overfished or depleted, and most of the rest are at their limit. Overfishing wreaks havoc on marine ecosystems and disrupts a crucial element of the food chain that humans and other animals alike rely on. In the Commonwealth of Dominica, fish is a major source of protein, and fishing supports lives and livelihoods in many of our communities. We are afraid that if we fail to conclude a meaningful agreement on fisheries subsidies, we will simply run out of wild fish to catch in our marine space in the years ahead, which would be a stain on humanity and a major betrayal of our collective responsibility to protect our oceans. Part of a meaningful outcome must also include adequate policy space for countries like the Commonwealth of Dominica, which are not contributors to the problem of overfishing, to develop their sector in a sustainable manner through an appropriate small players exemption and a carve-out for our artisanal and small-scale fishers. Additionally, the Commonwealth of Dominica has a keen interest in the reform of the WTO, and at MC12, we are prepared to support the launch of a multilateral process which is open, inclusive, and transparent. As a matter of priority, we also want to see the restoration of the full functioning of the dispute settlement system. Finally, having experienced more than our fair share of natural disasters and climatic events, we will continue to explore, along with other members, the nexus between trade and natural disasters, and ensure that other issues which are germane to the well-being of our small economies, such as building and strengthening resilience, post-COVID-19, are addressed by members. It is in this context that we laud the ministerial decision on the work program on small economies. Dominica reiterates its commitment to a successful MC12 and a viable multilateral trading system with the WTO at its core. I thank you very much.